Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the third chapter in the book of Micah. Micah was a Judean prophet, roughly contemporaries with Isaiah, and even though there was rarely, if ever, one prophet on the stage in Israel, there was always numerous false prophets. There was no shortage of them, and Micah contends against them in this chapter and somewhat earlier in the one which comes before it. So Micah, Jeremiah, and Amos especially had to contend with false prophets. And Micah issues prophecies and warnings and promises to both. The covenant nation was split when he prophesied the northern kingdom to the north, known as Israel, and Judah to the south. This prophecy pertains to Judah, his own people, even though in the opening verse he says it's Israel. We just want to understand that because it makes sense. You know, he goes on to refer of Mount Zion and whatnot. And we're just going to briefly review some of the verses which came in the chapter before it. Chapter 2, verse 1. Woe to those plotting wickedness and working out evil upon their beds. In the light of the morning they practice it, because it is in the might of their hands. So the people he was indicting and issuing warnings and judgment again lived. They lived to do evil. They sat up all night. It was their night and day routine and habit and settled and fixed process. And these were the abusive, exploitative landowners who stole the property of the poor, and the judges looked the other way, and they themselves did it too. And also verse 12, I shall certainly gather all of you, O Jacob. I shall bring together the remnant of Israel and put them together like sheep of the fold, like a flock in the midst of their pasture, they being noisy because of men. So Yahweh is our good shepherd, and especially ancient Israel's and Judah's good shepherd. The sheep hear the voice to bring it to the New Testament, John 10:3 and 27. So the remnant are going to recognize the sheep's voice and be gathered accordingly. The shepherd knows his sheep, the sheep know the shepherd, and they're all going to be gathered together. And then the opening verse of the third chapter reads, Then I said, Hear now, O heads of Jacob, and you rulers of the house of Israel, should you not know justice? The obvious answer is, of course, they should know justice. They were the leaders, the rulers, so one of their tasks and delegated duties was to administer justice throughout the land. Sadly and tragically, during apostate times, injustice prevailed. The wealthy were exploiting the poor, and the sin of idolatry appears as much in Micah just as much as everywhere else, but his focus appears to be social justice, the secular violations of the Mosaic law, which were to exercise them would have been good spirituality, would have been more than merely good civics. You who are hating good and loving evil, tearing away the skin from my people and the flesh from their bones. So the rulers hated good and loved evil. So if you hate good, you're not going to want to bring it about, bring it all around you. You might want to experience for yourself, but that's why people pursue evil in the first place. They love themselves, and focusing on oneself at the expense of the collective or society is evil in itself. And these rulers, these entrusted people in positions of authority and responsibility, were devouring their people. They were consuming them, they were exploiting them, they were fleecing them, and they were inflicting all sorts of injury on them, and they were supposed to be one covenant nation where rich and poor were alike equal, at least before the law. But that was not the case. The rich established loopholes, as they often do, to protect them and exploit the lesser beings. And who have eaten the flesh of my people and stripped off their skin, and have broken their bones, and have cut it up as into a pot, like flesh in a cooking pot. So he uses a familiar image. Anyone who's been in a kitchen knows what goes in the cooking pot. It burns and it boils, and that's what the leaders of Israel people were doing to the ones they led. The followers, the ones who they had followed, they were leading them astray, and the leaders were not only the priest and the kings, but also the false prophets. They are included in the leadership umbrella category, and we're going to learn about some of what they were up to soon. Therefore, when they cry to Yahweh, he does not answer them, and hides his face from them at that time, as they have made their deeds evil. So this is foul weather faith. That's when we turn to Yahweh when we need him most. That's when we use him as an emergency crutch pinch hitter, and to really just only call on him when we need him. And they were evil, so the prayer of the righteous is acceptable in the sight of Yahweh, but the prayer of the wicked is an abomination. So their deeds were evil, so their crying was to no avail. He did not answer them, and rightly so. There are certain conditions to be answered or affirmed in prayer, and if your deeds are evil, your prayers will be evil, because the prayers which emanate from the same person which does evil deeds will themselves be evil. And he's going to hide his face. That means they're not going to find him. They're going to search frantically and cry out to him when all goes awry, all goes wrong, because they had neglected the warning that Yahweh had sent them through his prophets. They were not going to end well, and they can't say they weren't warned. You can't say they had an excuse for meeting the calamitous end that they did. Thus said Yahweh concerning the prophets who lead my people astray, who are biting with their teeth and have called out peace. They even declare battle against him who does not give for their mouths. So the prophets, the true prophets, existed to lead the people on the right path. These prophets were leading people astray. They had their lies, their false dreams, their false visions, their own authority. They were preaching on their own authority. They did not have the Spirit's blessing and saturation as Micah and every authentic prophet did. They cried peace. That's a popular lie when war's around the corner and devastation and ruin. Judah was their destruction was right around the corner. In the first chapter, Micah frankly predicts the fate of Samaria, which came into being in 722 BM before Messiah. That's when the Assyrians conquered them and scattered them throughout their empire. So the northern kingdom would be no more, and Judah was next. Therefore it shall be night to you without vision, and darkness to you without divination. The sun shall go down on the prophets, and the day shall be dark for them. So without illumination, you're not going to know where you're going. Everything's going to be confusion. It's going to be darkness, and a people without vision shall not flourish, to paraphrase one of the passages in Proverbs. And they're not going to have divination, that's revelation, or divinity made manifest or known to them. That's what the prophets kind of did. They divined. They spoke and proclaimed oracles of divinity. And the sun is going to set, and it's never going to rise again on these false prophets who are leading the people astray. They will meet their just retribution for forsaking the duty they weren't even called to do in the first place. They took it upon themselves. They preached of their own authority. They had their own message. They were motivated by money, and they were hireling herders, distinct from the authentic prophet who tells the people what they need to know. False prophets tell people what they want to hear. There's always going to be motivated by filthy lucre, and there's always going to be itching ears who are searching for a more comfortable religion, and these false prophets supplied that demand. And the seer shall be ashamed, and the diviners embarrassed, and they shall all cover their lips, for there is no answer, O Yahweh. So they're going to be exposed as complete frauds eventually, inevitably, and that's going to be a source of shame and embarrassment for them. They're not going to speak anymore. They had earned their shame and embarrassment by speaking in the first place. They're going to cover their lips. They're not going to let words pass from the tip of their tongue, and they're not going to have any answer to their prayer or any revelation or communication from Elohim, in whose name they ostensibly prophesy and minister, but they were really Satan's servants and out for themselves. But truly I am filled with power, with the Spirit of Yahweh, and with justice and might, to declare to Jacob his transgression, and to Israel his sin. Now the presence and the power of the Spirit is absolutely essential for the prophet. This book, start to finish, was inspired by the Ruach Kadesh, the same one who inspired the prophets. Now inspiration and spirit are etymologically connected, and these false prophets, they did not have the Spirit. They did not have the enabling or guiding or the comfort or the counseling of this essential being, without whom no prophecy could no predicted prophecy could come to pass, because the Spirit is the one who knows the beginning from the end, and he tells the prophet the same. And the prophet's job was not only a forth-teller to predict the future, but a foreteller. They issued judgment and warnings on the present generation, and Jacob and Israel and Judah were living in sin. They were constantly transgressing. They were inexorably apostate, and that's why the presence of prophets became necessary. Now, if the covenant nation honored and obeyed the covenant, they wouldn't even need a prophet. Their existence is testament to their waywardness. Even though prophets are righteous individuals, they preached and prophesied to an unrighteous and wicked and fallen and lost and wayward nation. Hear this, please, you heads of the house of Jacob, and you rulers of the house of Israel, who despise justice and distort all that is straight. So he has a message for these perverters of justice, these corrupt administrators of justice. They despised justice, yet they were entrusted and authorized to execute it. And these were the rulers, the ones who were issued, that word appears in the opening verse of this chapter. These were the leaders, these were the kings and the priest, and they had led the nation astray. They had distorted deliberately all that is straight. So they knew the law, they knew the Torah, they had the education, they had the upbringing, but they did without it because there was more money to make in lies and selling peace when conquest and death and destruction were literally right around the corner. Those building up Zion with bloodshed and Jerusalem with unrighteousness. Zion was the site and center. It was the hill or mount in Jerusalem where the temple was located. It would have been the central site of central spiritual significance throughout the monarchy, all the way up till its destruction in 586. And then it would be restoration. So this, what comes after this sort of portends to the reconstruction of the temple, which has to be raised to the ground, much like a land must go fallow in order to grow, in order to plant something that can grow on it. The temple had to be renewed in order to be rebuilt, and it's all part of the divine design of restoration and redemption. Her heads judge for a bribe, her priests teach for pay, and her prophets divine for a price. Yet they lean on Yahweh and say, "Is not Yahweh in our midst? Evil does not come upon us." So in Exodus 18:21, the Israelites are instructed and informed and told to hate bribes. That is something which perverts justice. It gives the rich an unfair advantage in the legal jurisprudence. They are able to bribe judges. The judges were accepting it. And once you accept a bribe, you're pretty much indebted to the one who bribed you. So you have to do what they say. You are now in their debt, and that distorts the administration of justice. And priests were not supposed to teach for pay. All the rabbis and the priests were not given land or possession or properties. The Leviticals, they had 48 towns in Jerusalem where they were to live on the surrounding pasture land, and they also lived on the sacrificial animals, the leftovers. So they had their source of food, but they were not supposed to have possessions or money. Their possessions and property were Yahweh. And A.W. Tozer, to paraphrase him, the 20th century Methodist author, said that this made them richer and wealthier than any of the rajas or princes or emperors in all of human history. Yet these priests were teaching for pay. That was not something they were supposed to do. The rabbis, when the rabbi came around, the priest was the office at this time, but the rabbis, they were expected to work for their living and not accept pay for their practice. And of course, the prophets prophesied for a price. They were for sale, and lies were the more lucrative commodity. Truth goes a-begging. Lies are, in any age, a more lucrative commodity. So, of course, these prophets have a motive for prophesying for a price, and because they were bought and paid for, they prophesied a lie. And yet they had the audacity to lean on Yahweh and claim that his power and presence was around them and that no evil would touch them. They were going to be in a rude awakening, because anyone who claims on their own authority to receive a message from Yahweh, which is sent from demons or Satan or even self, is offending Yahweh and inviting his wrathful retribution. So they don't have a whole lot to look forward, these hireling herders. Therefore, because of you, Zion is plowed like a field, and Jerusalem becomes heaps, and the mountains of the house like a wooden height. So they bear the blame for the future condition of Zion, the temple, which is going to be razed to the ground and ruined and devastated, and Jerusalem's going to be a desert wasteland, a ghost town soon enough. And but this was all necessary for the path and plan of redemption. So the temple had to be razed and the Jerusalem had to be ruined in order for it to be redeemed and restored. And this takes us beyond to the post-exilic period. But that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.